Hey, I'm Jake, co-host of Old Code, New Tricks, and co-founder of Pilot West Studios. This podcast is for operators and owners of businesses who are looking to navigate the software space and either trying to make your business more efficient through software or trying to launch a software solution that you can turn into something that's revenue generating. We're trying to make this more approachable for you so that you can make more informed decisions. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing what are some questions you can ask to define whether a software project that you want to build is either a want or a need, and ways to really ask some questions that can either open that up to give you a better idea of what you might need or what you might not need. I hope you enjoy. So let's just dive straight into it. Let's talk a little bit about our backgrounds. Obviously, we started a software studio. I guess you call it agency in its formal term, but we just don't like to use that term necessarily. And our goal is to help business owners of non-technical background to either optimize their current software, essentially making their operations more smooth through software, or figuring out how to launch a product, a software-related product. So those are the things we'll be discussing. That's what we focus on our day job. But our background is obviously a mixture of a lot of different things. So maybe you just can give us a little down low of where you come from.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know, you and I met a few years ago, and I think we both quickly recognized that we kind of have we're very values driven, and it really kind of grinds our gears if we have to do things or expose to things that don't align well with our values. And the thing about the software industry is that it is a veritable gold mine as far as opportunities go. But anytime that you have that, you have the grifters and the snake oil salesmen that come along with it. And especially recently with the generative AI explosion that's happened, it feels like it's only gotten worse. And that might not be objectively true, but it certainly feels that way. So I think it all came to a head. You and I were basically just talking about some of the things that we were seeing, some of the trends we were seeing. You had already ventured out with a separate business entity, and we were kind of talking about kind of some of the overlap in our skill set and in our values and what we were seeing. And then I think we were literally just walking one day and we were like, should we start our own software studio? The answer was kind of like, why not?
Right. And so what has your background been for the people who don't know?
Yeah, so I've been working as a software engineer for just under a decade now. And so I've worked full stack. I've done it all. I've worked at really small startups, less like 4 engineers, supporting multi-million-dollar annual recurring revenue products. And then at my last stint, I was working on a much larger engineering team. I believe the entire engineering team at that company was closer to 50. So I've never worked at like a Shopify or Amazon, none of the big FANG companies or anything like that, but worked at a series of different startups. That's kind of been my background. Yeah.
Well, for me, my background has been primarily in sales and growth. So was originally started in the software industry selling the product and kind of sales engineering. And then it grew into growing teams and growing companies, from AE all the way up to VP of sales. I'm an advisor for a few companies. That's just what I do. That's what I enjoy is growing companies. But there is a huge disparity between what was being launched and how things were being sold, and product and software engineering and sales just aren't aligned. And that's really what made me go into business with Adam, is because we realized that we had this kind of pulling together of separate skill sets, but should be entirely together, to where it was kind of like the light bulb moment of like, why isn't growth and sales thought of when you're building software? And so that's kind of what made us start our software agencies, because we really try to look at a holistic approach, whether it be in being revenue generating and think about how to sell something even before it's built, or thinking about we're trying to solve a problem for a business, how do we think about this long term for the growth of the business, to where things aren't just a nice to have, and we're not just fixing acute problems, but we're looking at things from a holistic perspective. And that's really what we enjoy doing most. And that's why this partnership was really fruitful, and our clients have got a lot of value out of it, is because he might be technical, I might be more growth oriented, but everything else meets in the middle on our skill sets, values, and what we enjoy doing.
Yeah.
So it's been awesome. But go ahead, Adam.
I was going to say, as you were saying that, I think something that we share, one of our favorite questions, like when we're doing the exploratory phase, is a much nicer version of "so what?" It's like, all right, cool, we've got this idea. So what? Like, why now? How does that integrate with the existing processes? Oh, you're rolling this thing out. Are you going to strong arm this on people? Just like getting to the crux of like, the problem with software is that you can literally do anything. It's a strength, and it's its greatest weakness is that you can do anything. And with that freedom comes a ton of responsibility to try to figure out, are we doing the right thing? And I feel like the more that I do this, the more you have to have people looking at it from 16 different angles, all asking that question to really be able to distill down to the essence. So, somebody might look at a 2-man software studio and be like, okay, former VP of sales focused on growth. Like, how does that really slot in with the technical stuff? And I would say it's actually like one of our secret weapons, because, just because, I write the software doesn't give me a monopoly on asking, so what, right? It doesn't give me a monopoly on asking like, how does this drive the business forward? How are we solving these problems for our users?
Exactly. So let's start there for all of our non-technical CEOs and operators out there who are trying to better understand how can they utilize their software, and to find kind of the low-hanging fruit of making it more approachable to where they can actually solve real business problems. I mean, what is kind of step one for someone who isn't technically oriented, has never written a line of code in their life, to better have an idea of like, answering so what? I have this idea, or I have this thing that I want to solve for, this API I want, these things I want to get connected, this optimization I want to do. How do you get to the heart of, and asking the questions, what's the value of this thing if we do or don't do it?
That's a really good question. And I think, of course, it will be a little bit different depending on, what size is your company, and how expensive is it expensive? Because for some people, wasting 15 minutes a day is not a big deal. And spending $25,000 to fix a 15-minute a day problem is just, that math just doesn't make sense. But then I think there are other people who that 15 minutes a day is worth $25,000. And because they look at that 15 minutes a day across 10 months, 10 years, and they say, well, if I can recoup that 15 minutes a day, then that clearly is worth it. If you amortize that cost across 10 years or whatever. And I think 10 years I think that's a respectable goal as far as kind of thinking as far as timelines go. Software, if you're not doing something very trivial, I think most of the problems that you and I are interested in fixing that we typically handle for our customers, these are not, I have this 5-minute problem, I need a 30-minute script to fix it. There's a lot of people that can do that. We can do that. I think we like to operate at a higher, more tightly integrated level. And so when you're doing that, it really becomes a question of how painful is the pain, right? We talk to business owners all the time that they say, hey, we want software that does X. And when we really boil it down to its essence, X is just, we want to make an extra $1,000 a month, or it would just be nice to save 15 minutes a day, something like that.
Nice to have. Absolutely.
It's a nice to have. Exactly. And when you start charging what high level, tightly integrated business solutions cost, it quickly puts that into perspective, right? Where it's like, oh, this is a nice to have. This doesn't hurt. This is not a $30,000 paycheck pain. This is a $5,000 pain, right? So I think that's the first thing is to think about, like, what is this actually costing me as far as time, as far as revenue,
It can be boiled down, really any problem, into two buckets. It's time or money, right? And so when someone's coming to us and they say we want to do this or that thing and they can't articulate the value, usually we know this person either doesn't experience the pain enough or they're not a decision maker. Because I can tell you what, like, if I'm a business owner and I run a 7-figure business, I should damn well have a good idea of what I'm trying to do and how much it's going to make me or cost me if I don't do it. Yeah. And so I think that here's a framework I use in sales. It's 3 levels discovery. And I think you can actually ask those questions yourself if you're like a business owner trying to make software decisions on, is this thing worth it to build or to optimize or to look for something new? It's really like 3 levels deep. Like let's bring up the problem, whatever it is. Let's say, we have a really old crusty system that we don't like using, that we've been using for the past 20 years. And sometimes it breaks. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about the situation. What happens when, and insert the problem. So what happens when the software breaks and it's crusty and it doesn't work exactly how you like? Well, it causes some issues, some downtime. Okay, well, when you have downtime, how does it affect you? So we understand the situation, the kind of chaos around it. We understand how it affects you. Well, it affects me because, I might not be able to process orders, and then we're kind of getting backlogged. Okay, well, when you're getting backlogged, how much is that costing the business? So we understand in 3 questions, just kind of digging deep and asking the same question back to ourselves in those 3 different scenarios, we got to understand how the problem that we're talking about affects the chaos, like the chaos that's insinuating beyond just kind of the surface level. We're understanding how it's affecting you. And then we understand also how presumably it's affecting the business. And if you're doing this really well, at the end of it, you really should be able to quantify it in either some kind of time or monetary value. That's something that I do in sales, to help people articulate this themselves, because sometimes they haven't done it themselves. Yeah. But it's even better if you could do this for yourself, do this exercise for yourself. And then it becomes much easier that once you get into the conversations, and you might have software agencies or contractors who are saying this is going to cost $20,000. Actually, it's going to cost $250,000. The range can be huge, but if you can at least know, hey, this is a $30,000 a year problem, then you can really begin to understand and having more control over what's reasonable and what's not.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And I do think that there's one final area that I don't think we've talked to many folks in this area, but I think it definitely exists. And that is the area where I really can't tie time or money to this, but I feel very strongly about it. I have this kind of, emotional reaction to this situation. And it can be something that's irrational. Doesn't have to be something that it's like, oh, that totally makes sense. But and those are very hard to put a price tag on, but I think we all kind of get that instinctively, right? It's like, okay, for mine and my wife's 10-year anniversary, like, are we going to go to McDonald's? Well, there's no time or money reason that we couldn't go to McDonald's, right? But emotionally, we understand that that's not an appropriate, the situation warrants something else. It warrants something.
Right. There's something to be said about the experience.
Exactly.
Even if it's not optimized or it doesn't cost you more or less.
Absolutely. And there can be other opportunity. Maybe the example breaks down a little bit with the anniversary dinner, but there's other opportunity costs in there, right? There's other there's other factors that go into that decision. I think by and large, time and money are the most important, especially when you're running a business. By and large, there's not a ton of sentimental, emotional things involved with that typically, but that's not to say that they're not there.
Yeah.
But those are harder for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that again, you have to articulate those as well, right? Because it's going to be hard for you to get into conversations and try to articulate that with someone who you're supposed to guide, but you can't even articulate why you feel this way.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes like it's valid to say, hey, I hate using this janky thing. It works. I can do all the workarounds. And if we build something brand new, maybe we could optimize it a little bit, but like is it worth rebuilding outright?
Yep.
Not necessarily, but there is something to be said about having a better user experience for something that, you know, works, getting it optimized a little bit more, and just making it to where you like it, where you actually like using it and you use it more often. There's something intangible to be said about that too.
Yeah, that's is something that I've been kind of pondering recently, is how we optimize things. A silly example was I used to get overwhelmed tracking my macros, right? Tracking protein and carbs and fats. You know, you end up doing an extra 15 minutes of work just to sit down and eat a meal. And really all I cared about though was I getting my protein macros, trying to be a big boy, trying to put some muscles on. And it's interesting because I made the process arduous enough that I just didn't do it. I stopped doing it because there was so much involved. So I stopped doing something that I knew I needed to do that was going to contribute to the success that I wanted to have, because the process was just annoying enough that I just didn't want to do it. There was friction there. And that's something where it's like, okay, well, Adam, you say this is your goal. You say you want to build muscles. This is what you have to do. But I just didn't, despite the fact that, you know, again, that I think that's actually maybe a better example of the emotional aspect, where it's like, it's just frustrating enough that I'm not doing what I know I need to do. So I made it easier, and I was like, I'm just tracking protein, and I'm gonna ballpark it. I'm gonna get in the ballpark of what I know that I need. I'm not gonna pull out a calculator every time I sit down with, 143 grams of my, egg and chorizo bake. I'm just going to look at a square and say, okay, that's roughly 20 grams, and move on with my life. And now I've been doing it. It's like the process is easier. You stick with it, and I'm having success there. So I think software is similar. It can be very overwhelming. And if the friction is high enough, you're not going to do or incorporate the things that you need to incorporate, because it's just annoying. It's an emotion. It's a visceral response to something that's just like, get this out of my way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fair question.
Yeah, so that's been an interesting one, and I think that we've talked to some business owners who kind of feel the same way, where they've kind of been like, there is a revenue aspect of it, but there's also just this feeling of like, this solution sucks, and it can be better. And if it was better, then I would get time back. I would make more money, and I wouldn't hate the system that my business runs on,
Right. But I think the big buckets beyond the emotional side, which again, like I said, is fair. The big buckets are time and money. And if you look at that, I mean, you should really examine, like, how are your employees running the operation, and how could it be more like optimized? Like there's a client that we're working with where if we build this right, we should save one full-time employee like 4 to 6 hours a day. Why? Well, it was due to double entry, right? Because the system, they had two systems managing kind of the front end and the back end of their business. And so they have to like print things off and add it here, add it to this system, move this thing over here. So literally it was double or triple entry. Yeah. If you're in that case, like if you're a business owner who's dealing with employees doing double and triple entry, that's a very obvious use case of you're probably losing paper. If you're using paper, things are getting lost, things are not getting logged appropriately. There's a lot of time being spent, like maybe 20% of their time just doing data entry, where that becomes very easy to articulate if you just take a look at how inefficient is this actually? Instead of like saying, well, we've been doing this for years. If you actually look at your business and the operation and go, well, they're spending this much time doing double entry. What if it was on actual revenue generating things instead of double entry?
Yep. Like
those things are really easy. That makes it go, well, you could spend a lot of money on a system. And if you're running a $5-10 million, even a $2 million business, and you reduce a few employees, from having to do 10 or 20% of their day as doing double or triple entry, then the impacts on actually you be able to ship your product and to do your service, for them to focus more on sales and marketing, really opens the door up to, to even more compounding growth year over year. So Adam, I guess I'll pass it back to you. Double entry, triple entry, that's an obvious, really clear sign that, hey, you should probably build something else or find something more efficient. What would be some other things that business owners could look for who, again, aren't technical, who could just go, where is the opportunity here that I could find where software could solve it?
I think another common one that we see are customers who have bespoke systems that were designed 10, even 20 years ago. Your business changes, right? Your business, think about the first year that you're in business, and then think about year 5, think about year 10, think about year 15. Like, how much similarity is there? There's some, to be sure. You're still the same business, but you've learned so much. You've adopted different practices. Think about the difference between technology 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The decisions that were perfectly rational and fit your business and fit your needs then might not be the same now. It might.
Yeah.
It might.
There's much different problems at 100,000 to a million to 10 million, right? Like, those are all very different problems. And the operation's going to look a lot different because you're going to have different hierarchies and people involved.
Yeah. There's a reason that FedEx still maintains their COBOL. I'm pretty sure it's COBOL. Their COBOL system. It doesn't make sense financially from a business standpoint to replace it. It does what it needs to do, and they pay lots of people really good money to make sure that system is maintained.
And for those who don't know, just layman, COBOL is a very, very old system, like language of coding, and the developers who do that, who can actually operate in that language, are few and far between.
Yes.
And a $1 billion company that all of our packages are depend on that software.
Yeah. COBOL programmers are a very, very rare bird. And
how much do they make? Because they're so rare.
Dude, if I had to guess, I'm thinking at least north of 200K. I would be very surprised if it was less than 200K. But it could go north of that easily, I would think. And it's possible that I'm speaking sort of out of ignorance. I've never worked at FedEx, but it's kind of like the industry myth, right? The mythos, the legend of old code, and maybe they are working on replacing it. I don't know, but it's an example. You don't always need to rebuild. Sometimes you just need somebody to come in and maintain or clean up a legacy system. Sometimes legacy systems are perfectly fine. But it's at least worth looking at, right? Asking, does this software fit my needs? Does it serve the needs of the business? And does it do it in a way that's not impeding our growth, either revenue or headcount or speed, delivery, whatever that growth might look like? And if it is, that's where, we can have the conversation of like, okay, does it make more sense to maintain? Does it make more sense to build? And we've had several prospects that kind of brought us that kind of problem. And we laid out the pros and cons. Hey, based on your particular system, based on your business, here's why it would or would not make sense to rebuild from scratch. When you rebuild from scratch, you get to take all those hard-won lessons and you get to build from the ground up on a foundation that's already been battle tested across, a long time, decades. And sometimes you get in there and you're just like, honestly, this isn't bad. We need a little bit, we need some more guardrails here. We need some better logging, some better observability into the system so we know what's happening. Sometimes that's sufficient,
Yeah. So then I guess last point here on kind of that topic, how could a business owner or operator better decide, let's say that they have a software that's legacy, but they know it could be improved, but they're not exactly sure if they're in the camp of it's a nice to have or it's a need. Like, what would be the first place to start to really kind of articulate, okay, this might be something worth looking into more? Or it's, hey, it's just fine the way it is. Maybe you just need to polish it up.
That's a good question. I think one of them, like I said, is it impeding your growth? If you find yourself thinking, if only my software did X, then I could Y. That thought right there is a trigger that you should at least talk to someone, right? You should at least, shout out to ourselves here. We'll literally have a free conversation with anybody about this type of thing, just to dive into it, just to say, hey, does it make sense? Like, what does your system do? How, okay, if we were to rebuild that, what opportunity would that unlock for you? And we'll be the first to say, hey, you know what? It's going to cost you $30,000 to $60,000 to rebuild the system. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. You might increase, maybe it's an e-commerce platform or something like that. Okay, you're going to increase the number of $30 orders that you get by 20%. It's going to take 10 years to pay this off. That doesn't make any sense. That's not a good investment. Or, we had a prospect where rebuilding their platform could have netted them hundreds of thousands of dollars extra a year. Then it becomes a very interesting prospect where it's like, okay, now we just need to talk about how do we ensure that? How do we ensure that when we deliver, you are increasing the orders? Like, how are we making that bet? And how sure are we of that bet? I think that's one of the biggest ones for me. Anytime I stop and I think, man, this is frustrating. There's friction. It would be so nice if I could just X. That is my internal trigger for my own life to say, hey, do I need some automation here? Do I need something that's going to push these problems away? Is this a job a robot can do?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that's the exact question, right? Is if you're getting into that mentality, that's a really good place to at least know, okay, we might have something here. I think that, we'll get into more of the dealing with developers, hiring developers, managing relationships with a developer or an agency more on. But I do want to just go back to your point of having options. That's obviously something we do. We're honest in our opinions, even if it's not, making us more money, or we'll give away free options. Say, hey, you shouldn't build this, or this needs more work before this can even be built. I think that's in the industry. If you're looking for a software developer, you're having conversations with a contractor or agency, there's two really big things I'd say when you're making this decision on trying to figure out if it's going to be worth it or not. Is one, like, make sure that these people are actually hearing you out and they're not just quoting you after 5 minutes. If they don't understand your business, that really doesn't make sense, because they're not going to build something that can actually impact your business, right? So they really need to intimately understand that. And then additionally, they trust your gut. Absolutely. If something
when you're talking
smells,
to someone, if you're talking to someone and you're like, this guy's talking right past me. Like, I've explained it 3 times how my business does this thing, and trust your gut. Don't expect that communication will improve as the project goes on, because that's typically not how that goes.
Yeah. And the second one is just like, you should have options. Yep. There's no reason why you shouldn't. And it's so, we've seen it with, and why we started business, we see with so many software agencies, like, everybody's just so trigger happy to talk to somebody for 5 minutes and be like, yeah, we can rebuild it. It's going to be $250,000. And not think for a second, like, hey, sometimes these older legacy systems that are 20 years old, like, we get in there, like, this was actually built relatively well. It has good architecture. Like, this just needs some buttoning up and maybe, revamping kind of more the back end to make sure it's going to stay good for the long term, in regards to scale. But beyond that, it's not, you should have options, just like with anything else. Like, if you go to buy a car or any other service, like, you have packages and different options. Yes, granted, software is interesting, custom software, because it is custom. But you should have some empowerment, even if you're non-technical, where someone should say, hey, we can do this for this, and here's the reasons why. Or we could do this, and here's the reasons why. And you should be able to have an informed decision on, okay, I think that this is a $60,000 problem. I'll spend $80,000 on it because, and I'll maybe know that longer term, this isn't going to be a 20-year solution, but this will get me an ROI within 2 years. Awesome. Let's go for that. But you really have to, if they're not giving you options and they're just going for one, then I would be really curious to know, are they trustworthy, and why did they come to that decision? And maybe just ask them, hey, why did you come to that decision? Why do you think it needs to be rebuilt? And if they can't articulate it in a way that makes sense with the way your business operates, then they're just selling you on something that's not legitimate, most likely.
Yeah. And especially if it's hours involved. Because I think one of the reasons that, hourly based billing. I think that one of the reasons that the software industry has some of the kind of snake oil essence about it, if you will, is that software is incredibly complex. Like, I mean, software is incredibly hard to do correctly. And I say that as somebody who sometimes gets it wrong, right? Like it's one of those things that it's a domain that is so unlike any other domain. Like when you do construction, you have known variables and there are some unknown unknowns, but by and large, like they literally write books. This is how you build a house, and you can go read that book. You can go watch YouTube videos, and you can build your own house if you've got the time, the money, and the dedication and the desire. Software is really hard. It is really, really hard. So when you start combining, here's this hard thing, and I'm going to charge you how long it takes me to do this hard thing, the more unknowns that you have, the more complexity, the less nailed down your requirements are, man, that thing's just going to expand like a balloon. And so getting an estimate is much different from getting a fixed quote. And I think that a lot of people are starting to realize that. And I hope the software industry is kind of starting to turn a little bit, and the developers are taking more of that risk on themselves to say, okay, I've built a website before. I've nailed down the requirements with this client. I think that I can sufficiently eat this risk and we can deliver it for X, right? That puts the benefit. You take the risk upon yourself. It puts the extra benefit upon the client. And they don't have to worry, because again, like you said, is this a $60,000 to $80,000 investment? Maybe. Is it a $200,000 investment? Not if I think it's a $60,000 to $80,000 investment. And that uncertainty is a huge part of why software projects fail. It should be about a delivered result, not the length of time it takes to deliver said result.
Yes. And that is also on the operators and the CEOs, like the clients. If you're the person coming to an agency or developer, it's a big problem that I see. And these are usually like mid-level people more than it is business owners. But you should be able to come to them and articulate exactly the problem and what you're solving for and what is the desired result. What does a good look like? Because oftentimes we get into a conversation with someone who maybe wants to like launch a software product, or they have existing business and they want to add a software wing that they might want to commercialize to their customers. And it's so typical that like we ask them, hey, how do we get this off the ground? And they go, well, I like it to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And they don't realize that it's not just a cool little feature that takes a few extra days, that each feature that they're adding on is adding another $100,000. And this thing is going from $100,000 to $600,000 if you actually wanted to build all of that with a functionality. And so that's why I would just say, for anyone who's not technical, that's totally fine. Just speak to what good looks like. What is the pain you're solving for? What does good look like, and the result that you're expecting on the back end, so that it doesn't get bloated. Because already, if you're working with an agency that does hourly billing, oftentimes the project's going to go further than they said it would. The cost is going to balloon higher than they said it would from the original estimate. And then also, this what we call scope creep is going to increase as well, where you're trying to do more and more things adding on to it, which is going to increase your costs, and you're going to lose focus on what you're originally trying to solve for. So you really have to, that's why articulating the problem and what good looks like and the result is like just so vital. We got a few more minutes here, Adam, to wrap us up.
Yeah. I think to kind of further your point there, I think a lot of times what ends up happening in software, again, remembering that software is an incredibly complex domain, three people can say the same thing and it can mean four different things in their head. And because we're talking about these ethereal concepts, we're not talking about a house where I can see, oh, hey, you put that door in the wrong place, or you flipped it. I wanted it to open in and it's opening out. Like, we can see those things and we can flag them and we can fix them very early in the process. I think and I this construction metaphor is working really well. I think that most companies would succeed more in their software process in their software projects by having a type of general contractor, by having somebody who is a software developer, who is not involved in the software development process, but acts as a liaison between the business owner and the person writing the software, so that they can translate. So when the business owner says, I want it to be fast, man, that can mean so many different things. And if you're working with an outstanding software agency, obviously they're going to be able to communicate these things well. But a lot of times, if you're trying to outsource your work overseas, nothing wrong with that. But one of the things that you lose is the fidelity of the communication. So when you say, or whatever, I want this button right here and I want it to do X, man, there is a ton of gaping space there for interpretation. Mm-hmm. And if you're not linking that back to the core business purpose, that make that little mistake 1,000 times over the course of even a 1-month project, and you can easily see why projects just fall apart. They just completely fall apart. And that's something that we've actually done before. We've stood between essentially a business owner who needed this and an existing developer that they already liked. They didn't want to fire them or find somebody else, but we came in and helped them clarify, okay, here's exactly what we need this software to do. We've designed database schemas where we said, hey, here's what this software needs to be able to do. You can now take this schema and hand it to any developer, and it's like code. It's written in a way that you can't misinterpret it, so it's going to accomplish your business goals, but you don't have to be able to speak the language of the developer. And I think that's something it's hard, and a lot of people, product people, tend to fill this translator role, but it's not always bulletproof. And small and medium-sized businesses, for the most part, they don't have product teams.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I would think about. If I was a business owner, hearing these words, these wise, sage wisdom words from Adam, I would find myself a general contractor. I would find somebody who knows software, even if I don't actually want them or need them to build the software. Mm-hmm. And I would have them stand between, and I would talk about my business. They're not allowed to talk code to me. They can only talk business. They can only talk product. And then they would be my trusted liaison to then communicate and extrapolate that out to a dev team. And in a lot of traditional engineering companies, this is your tech lead, your team lead. Your team lead is your person he's your kind of senior man on the team. He's going to be coupled with the product and the design person, and he's going to make sure that all these things get flagged and get brought up. And that's why you have code that works at the end, and these projects get delivered on time. So
awesome.
Yeah,
this has been really helpful, man. I think that this is, I hope that people get value out of this. If this is something that you want help with and you want to have a conversation, you're having some kind of software problem, you're looking to launch a thing, go to pilotweststudios.com and you can book a call with us. If not, we'll see you on the next Old Code New Tricks. Thanks for joining.